What happens when two brilliant minds from completely different worlds step into the same space? What happens when we let go of debate and choose convergence instead? This is the Synergy Sessions, where ideas converge and new worlds emerge. Hosted by veteran broadcaster Sandie Sedgbeer, these conversations explore the fertile edge where science meets soul, mystery meets method, and truth gets redefined. Paradigm shifting, thought expanding, unexpected. This is not a debate, it's a convergence. The Synergy Sessions, where ideas converge, new worlds emerge.
Hello. Consider this. What if the future of humanity is already here, arriving through children who defy our conventional understanding of intelligence, communication, and consciousness? Joining me today for a deep dive into the emergence of the new human, exploring how autistic telepathic children, the gene keys, and planetary evolution are intertwined, are poet, author, teacher, and Gene Keys founder Richard Rudd, and pioneering autism integration specialist and author Suzy Miller, who will be sharing their information and their insights on how these extraordinary children are not only wired differently, but are pioneering a new collective intelligence. Take note, this is more than a conversation. It's a call to awaken to the reality that the future isn't something we're waiting for. It's already here. Are we ready to receive it? Suzy Miller, Richard Rudd, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sandie. It's great to be here.
So I know that both of you can answer many of these questions, so we'll just go back and forth in turn, but you've both spoken about the new human emerging. I'd like to know how you define this being and what you think makes them fundamentally different from previous generations. Suzy, let's start with you.
Yeah, for me, the new human is demonstrating capacities that we all have access to, but we've kind of been conditioned out of or forgotten. So you mentioned in the title, whether that's telepathy or whether that is other gifts that go along with what I call that unified field. No, these individuals, new humans, are expressing that. They're demonstrating that day in, day out. They're living it instead of aspiring to it, I guess is the best way to say it.
Richard, what's your take on it?
Yeah, well, as some of you might have heard through, if you dialed into the Gene Keys at all, that there's this notion of a kind of planet-wide mutation appearing in deep inside our DNA. That will be a rolling mutation that will begin to take over, and change us from the inside out. So, as I understand it, it's a new awareness operating system. So it's a bit like an upgrade on our computer. It's an operating system, and as I'm understanding the new operating system, that it emerges from our kind of biology, and it's a mutation that allows our awareness to travel outside our body through resonance, through the field. And some of us are, sensitive ones among us already are beginning to do this. And the way I understand this new mutation is like it's a wide open, highway that interconnects different bodies through a single awareness. And we may have heard stories of this, and we may have even dreamed it. And there's stuff about it, has been for a long time on the internet, and the future consciousness. So for me, it is about that actually occurring at a biological level, and that then appearing in humanity and in different places, and then this networked consciousness over the next decades and hundreds of years emerging subtly inside the old human, it's literally like a phoenix arising from within an old framework that is falling away. and all the trappings of that framework are also falling away.
And you've talked about 2027 as being a pivotal moment in this kind of this transformation. Why 2027? What is so significant about that year?
Yeah, that's a year that I first came into touch with through the human design system and my previous mentor, Ra Uruhu. And he was a real genius at tracking cycles using the same methodology as the gene keys, which is looking at precession of the equinoxes and looking at grand cycles and then interpreting the kind of meaning of those cycles, especially at a kind of biological level. But at all different levels, sociological, biological, political, at all different levels of beginning to see spiritually, how is this new human emerging? When is it emerging? And 2027 was a date that emerged out of using the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching in the wheel of life, which is what the gene keys are based on. And so that date kind of became, in Ra's mind and in my own and many others who are kind of tracking these cycles and patterns, it became like a kind of pivotal arrival point. And I kind of use it cautiously because I know that people get very excited about dates and kind of project, everything's going to be different after that date and it's all going to change. And sometimes these things are very subtle, but I think it's part of a process that began in 1987,
Yes.
which was this harmonic convergence. And then it reached a kind of a grounding in 2012, and then it kind of peaks the cycle of full imprinting in 2027. So this period that we've been in is like a really magical period, and that kind of 2027, I believe, does mark in some sense the closing of a door, where old energies then begin to deteriorate and new energies are given life force, literally. So from that date, I would expect to see a further deterioration of the old forms, probably quicker than ever, and probably quite scary to the sort of ego that doesn't really understand what's going on. But also a big growth of the new, and that might be only within certain groupings and people who are kind of connected to that change or that mutation, or it's occurring inside them or someone close to them. And I would expect that to really be building its momentum from that date onwards. That's how I kind of have understood it down the years. So it's amazing to be approaching that time and feeling into, I think conversations like this emerging in preparation, I guess.
Suzy, as Richard says, this has been happening for a long time, and a lot of people have been looking to this period. But you've been living it. You've spent the last nigh on 30 years working with and telepathically communicating with these new kids, the autistic population and more. What do they say? I know you said recently, just last year, they're finally landing.
Right.
What does that mean? What's your take on this?
Well, I want to address some of the dates that Richard was just talking about, because they just go hand in hand with some of this experience that you were sharing, or what I've been experiencing over the last 30 years. Like that harmonic convergence piece was huge within the collective consciousness of the children. When I was interacting with them, they would say that harmonic convergence opened, you might say, a gateway or a portal to start allowing souls to start coming in that were going to be an opportunity for our collective human mutation. And so, they were sharing about that in 1986, 1987, and that field just started coming in. And they said every soul the souls that were coming in at that time that would ultimately end up having a diagnosis of autism or something like that were souls that had answered that call, that humanity at that time, we really wanted a new kind of human. we wanted, whether we were consciously asking for it or unconsciously asking for it, we were already kind of done with the patriarchal separation energy. And we were looking for almost an opportunity to move from a more cognitive, kind of fixated masculine energy to a more intuitively based energy. And so all these souls started coming in. And then in 2012, that was the year that we were in Sedona, Arizona, doing a live event. And that consciousness, I love what you said, Richard, about that, like kind of being almost like an opening point or a peak point where then it all started coming in and landing, for 2027. Because in 2012, when we were at that live event in Sedona, Arizona, it's like there was something that just opened up on that day, and it was so profound that it had me on my knees in tears, because it was almost like getting a glimpse of what that consciousness actually was, what it was going to be bringing to humanity. At that time, they talked about, we are the new science, we are the new medicine, we are the new education, we're the new technology, and we're the new currency, which they call the currency of love. So that opened up in 2012 in a very real way, in my experience. And then this whole energy, the reason I was so excited to have this conversation with Richard and all the information that he knows about this kind of emerging within each and every one of us from the inside out. To me, it looked like you have a consciousness that's coming into a higher consciousness that's coming into a denser energy field. And as that layers into a denser energy field, collective humanity starts to mutate as well. It's like they're holding that energy. And so this whole, the kids had also started talking about, it's going to take a bit of time for us to be able to fully land. So when I started hearing in January of last year of 2024, we're landing, I was like going, oh my gosh, like this is, having seen that in 2012, and then knowing that they were really starting to layer in. And to me, things that are showing up right now, like the telepathy tapes or like this information going out far and wide, is all preparation for them to be able to really take hold. It's like tilling up the ground so that by 2027, they're fully in and anchored, and then we all start. I think that's both the end of an old kind of separation identity and the very beginning of this more unified field that these kids seem to be bringing. And
that leads to my next question, Suzy. And both of you answer this. If these children are the forerunners of a new collective consciousness, what does that say about the future of individual identity? I mean, are we moving forward to a different experience of self?
I can only share with you what I know from the kids directly. I mean, to me, it feels like we're shifting from this separation identity, this divisiveness, to a more unified field. And if they're holding this more unified field, then to me, it's like we're getting the opportunity to truly step into what love actually is. Love is that which unifies, according to the kids. So unifying different aspects of ourselves, what parts do we like? What parts don't we like? What do we try to kick out and assume that we're whole? We can't kick out anything and feel whole. So, some of the skill sets that they have, telepathy and this ability to bilocate, or this ability to, get in our heads or feel our emotions. If there's no separation, there's no separation. And I think we're, as a human species, we're conditioned to kind of go, oh, that means I'm in threat if I don't have my own sovereignty or my own identity. But what if it means we're interconnected? We know our interconnectedness. We're interwoven. We support each other through that unified field in a way that we simply can't if we only see ourselves as in division, divisiveness, separation. So to me, I think it's the lived experience of that might be threatening to a lot of ego mind identities. Like Richard was saying, it might be a little scary, but the ultimate outcome of that, to me, I mean, just having connections with these kids, as long as I have, it's not a threat. You know, it's an opportunity for authenticity and I would say true love. Like, yeah, it's an opportunity for something that's to be experienced beyond what we've experienced before.
Richard?
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing to hear, and I completely concur with that. I think for me, you know, there's often a misconception around unity consciousness. There's this, you know, people have it's the sort of the divided consciousness can't understand it because it's in a different frequency, it's in a different reality, so it looks kind of like I'm going to lose my identity, but actually the exact opposite is the case. You know, that actually uniqueness and unity, they even share the same root. You know, they actually enhance each other. So there's the sort of shadow capacity. There's the shadow that we're letting go of, but we're not letting go of the beauty or what I call the gift. You know, the creativity. You know, so actually we're the genius that's actually inside us. So a collective unified field can enhance our genius, our individual, unique diamond genius. You know, like it becomes even more polished and even more refined and obviously a lot more supported. So it's not at all the fearful thing that some people think we're going to lose our individuality and we're all becoming this amorphous thing. It's not like that. And it's also not a return to the old tribal gene pools of the deep past, right? It's not a kind of going backwards, although there's an element of that being brought forward and integrated into the new human, you know, because that tribal base, when I say tribal, I mean that kind of close family knit community interconnectivity that our indigenous people have, you know, and we, you know, used to, you know, modern people used to have that kind of that much more telepathic, you know, sense. But it's a different kind, like what Suzy, what you're talking about in these children is telepathy at another level. It's at a new level. It's not just the tribal telepathy of we're doing this because it's survival based. So we hear stuff and we tune into when there's going to be a storm because someone feels it, or the seer in the group starts to feel it. This is different. This is a transparency that travels through the genome that allows kind of a piercing awareness to kind of burgeon in multiple individual uniquenesses, right? And it's very difficult for us to imagine what that might look like, or what such a being is capable of as well. You know, and when I say a being, I mean a human being, but also a collective human being, a collectivity, a networked consciousness, you know, a neurally networked. And I don't just mean the brain, I also mean that, like Suzy said, that it's through the field of love, it's through this field of the unconditional love that the wisdom field of the higher brain functioning can occur. And that's where, you know, we begin to experience, in Gene Keys we call them siddhis. It's a word from Sanskrit, and it means like divine gifts. So like telepathy might be one of those, but it's even there are other ones as well. Like bilocation is another one, and they're kind of superpowers. You know, we would think of them as superpowers. And different teachers and masters from the beginning of history have manifested these. And there are so many stories that if you're paying attention, you would hear them. And they're quite self-similar. So when you explore, or if you've had the privilege of being perhaps with one of those rare beings who's manifested it or is manifesting it, then you will know that is not a kind of miracle. It actually exists already as a seed that is waiting. It's dormant. It's been dormant in our DNA. And so in a way, you could say at the moment, as we're going up to 2027, that these forerunners, these children are like, are the divine consciousness experimenting with the early life forms of like, wow, of this network consciousness.
Yeah.
And then as 2027 comes, and then we begin to grow and mature more deeply. And I think that we'll find ways to integrate it more efficiently into the body, because the body actually has to change to adapt, to accommodate the new awareness system. Do you see what I mean? Like a new awareness system operating out of an older networked body is not, it's only half there, right? So the body has to catch up. So the body has to mutate and change, and that does take time. And and in some it may not completely mutate. The old housing may remain, but the new awareness is still operating fully 100% inside, and that can be an equal, that's just how it is. That can be an equally beautiful phenomenon, because it's the inner awareness that's where the soul lives. The body is just a shell.
Yeah.
And so what I'm seeing is it's learning from itself, as like you said, Suzy, it's coming down this higher consciousness, and it's coming into a biological form that's not entirely suited for it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And as it's coming in, it's mutating it.
Yes.
And it'll go on changing the amino acid structures and the codon connections inside us. And I believe that we'll be able to read that, and we may already be able to see early versions of it appearing in the genome. And I was interested in conversations with Zach Bush about this, as he has a lot to say about mutations of DNA. So
you both had really profound awakening experiences, and that, some decades ago. I mean,
Yeah.
Richard, you said it was like seeing reality without filters, and Suzy, your nervous system pretty much caved in. Do you think that people awakening now, have to go through the same kind of rewiring process, or will it be a lot easier because, we're 30, 40 years on?
I think it's going to be easier. I hope for some anyway. But again, this question just on the heels of what we were just talking about, when you have a more refined consciousness, let's say it that way instead of higher or lower, but if you've got a more refined consciousness that you have access to, or that is being brought into the collective right now. And whether we say it's through these kids or through, it's not just them, it's through all kinds of different experiences. But yeah, I mean, I can speak, from my own experience, having one of these kids open you up and open you up fully, like in a nanosecond, was way too much 30 years ago or in 99 for my body to really take in. My nervous system wasn't, as Richard was saying, it's like my nervous system wasn't hardwired. I wasn't wired for that frequency. So, on the outside, it looks like your nervous system is caving. On the inside, you're completely aware you're having this, almost like this spiritual awakening. You're having this refinement or connection to something that is much more of who you are. That's how I perceived it. Much more of who I was opening, because this kid had the right key and put it in at the right time, and just boom, now you have access to everything. So the higher states of our consciousness, or the more refined states of our consciousness, are ready, willing, and able for that. It's our physical body that has all the stored trauma and all the ego mind identity patterns. And that's the part that freaks out, quite frankly. It's like, what do I do with that? How do I function in that? So that does take some time. But to answer your question about, is it getting easier? I do think that there are also patterns of, you might say, like way showers or people that kind of go before, Richard Clearly, my own experiences. There's so many people that kind of have had access to some of this information a little bit ahead of time, you might say, so that it could kind of create an easier pathway for people moving forward. And I think the Gene Keys does that really beautifully as well. It kind of sets this tone so that people can step into this with greater ease, because we don't need to simply be re-traumatized by our awakenings. We're really given those opportunities so that we can integrate more of who we actually are. So,
Richard?
Yeah, well said. And in the Gene Keys, it's specifically preparing. It's a model or a system or a wisdom that's specifically to prepare humanity, for those who are ready for this new consciousness. And so it starts exactly what you said, Suzy. It's like it starts with the shadow. So it gives us a series of like shadow maps or wound maps that help us process and understand and transform those shadow frequencies much more quickly, because it's a very accurate, they're precise maps, they're algorithms, and so each individual can then learn those algorithms, understand them, release them, move through them, and then your body is ready to receive higher frequencies, and the process of actually transmuting those shadows is the awakening journey. So each time you have a breakthrough in your own shadow diving practice, more love kind of cracks through the openings in your heart and then starts to fill you. And then you have to accommodate to that new higher frequency that the love creates. And it's not just love, it's love wisdom. It's the intelligence of love. It's not just the feeling of love. It's, we talk about love and we think of love as sometimes as an emotion, and it's not. It's like a whole deep truth knowing, that's in every cell of our body. It's the memory of our soul and us as an eternal being, and experience the waves of awe that come from that awareness. And that's a massive thing for a human who's been living in a conditioned world, believing that, it's kind of materialist based and all of that stuff that most of us been brought up with, or many of us. And that all of that has to kind of crack open and break down, so that and that's mentally, emotionally, and physically. And, those levels have to kind of be prepared so that new being can kind of just drop neatly into our being. And yeah, it's been a journey for me too, of preparation, but I'm very happy to be doing the work. I wouldn't be doing anything else.
So those who've come before have kind of created a morphic field that just makes it that little bit easier for others to step into.
Yeah.
Richard, you've talked about moving beyond language into colour, sound, and amino acid frequency. Can you explain, how these elements interact and why they might be the next frontier of human evolution?
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of a quite in my teachings, this is quite an advanced level of understanding that I'm just sort of penetrating now. And what it's showing me is that kind of and I know this is an old insight, an old intuition, that we're made up of we're made up of light. We are light, and we're not just photon light. We're not just the light that we can see with the eye. We're we're light as consciousness, or consciousness as light. It's a metaphor in a way, because it's not really light. It's not the light that we know. The light of consciousness is eternal. right? So that's a light that can never be snuffed out, and there's nowhere where that light isn't, right? Even in deep darkness, that light hides and exists, so it's even there in the core of the shadow, which is the whole point of the shadow work. So yeah, that we're made of these layers of light in frequencies, and understanding how those layers of light are kind of encoded in our bodies as individuals is an amazing thing as well. So that's a technology I'm kind of exploring through the gene keys, but also sound. So we're beneath that light is sound. They're interwoven. You can't kind of separate the sound and the light. So you've got the colors, and the rays, and they're not just the 7 colors that we know. There are many more. In the subtle levels, there are literally trillions of colors. And to the subtle eye, to the higher, the eye that sees everything, that higher eye, there are literally trillions of different colors. So it's, that's hard for us to understand. And those colors they're not just visual. They have texture, they have sound in them, they have flavor, they have smell, they combine all the senses that we know and other senses that we don't know. So they have mythologies hidden in them as well, and they have whole kind of memory and storyline in the future, and it's all encoded in the rays of light. And so we can no longer say that there are 7, even though that's quite a useful way for the human brain to understand. And there are 7 tones as well. And so, yeah, going deep, this is all deeply rooted in the biology, right? As you said, in the amino acids and the codons in our body, and how all that operates. That's all musical as well. Everything. We're harmonics. We're made of harmonics. So the deeper we understand these subtle layers, the more we can tune them. It's like we tune our own instrument at very, very subtle levels, and then those higher capacities can manifest fully inside us, and allow us to kind of break through even time, because time and light are interconnected, as we know through black holes, right? We know this through physics, right? So when you really pierce the core of what is light and the light in you also enter the timeless domain. You begin to bend time. So you begin to see the past and see the future and remember, and timelines kind of change. And that's when it gets really interesting, but I'll stop there and let Suzy carry on.
Suzy, I know that in your work with the children, you've witnessed some of this happening. You've witnessed these kids being able to change the molecular structure of foods and all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. And the time element, that piece that you were just talking about, Richard, it's like I couldn't I'm a see it to believe it kind of girl most of the time. It's like I have to have these experiences so that I can start to embody them myself. And I did have a young woman, probably, I don't know, a few years ago that was 16. And I was trying to figure out this time thing because the kids kept talking about, every kid that came for a while was talking about the timeless nature of being. They just kept using that phrase. And I was like, I don't know what that means. What is that? And how do I embody that? And I had a young woman who came to me for some energy work. She was 16 at the time. She was, she said to me, she goes, don't talk me out of doing what I'm doing. 16-year-old, right? Don't talk me out of doing what I'm doing. Just help me make it easier, help me embody more so that I can do what I'm doing. And basically what she was doing was her soul knew that she was connecting with children all over the world that were being in abusive situations, having those kinds of things. It's almost like she was the angel. Like if a child was calling out, she was the one that was receiving that information. So I was just helping to integrate that for her a little bit more. We were working with that. But during the time I was saying to her, I go, this is really interesting to me because it's almost like whatever's happening now, you're going to be it's like you're going to be a voice for these kids. Like in the moment that they need a voice, you're going to be that strength that helps come through them to be that voice. And she was a speller, so she didn't have a physical voice, or spoken voice. And I just said to her, I go, that's just really fascinating to me that you don't have that spoken voice, but you're going to be a spoken voice for these kids who need it in the moment. And then all of a sudden I went, oh my gosh. And I said, wait a minute. When I was 16, I had an incident where somebody was, being more aggressive towards me and kind of demeaning or whatever. And I was literally on the floor. And at one moment, something just came through me and I stood up and I poked that person in the chest. And I said, you have no idea who you're speaking to, which was not my norm at that moment, right? Ran upstairs, laid down on the bed and just crashed. And I said to this young woman, I said, it's like that. It's like whatever, it's like that. It's like you were there. And then all of a sudden I thought she was there, the timeless nature of being. And I started to cry and I said to her, I said, was that you? I mean, it didn't make any sense. She's 16 now. I was 16 then. She's trying to help other people as she moves forward from 16 to have this. And I started crying and I asked her, I said, was that you? And she's typing, type, spelling out these words. And her mother had to obviously give voice to it. And she said, I've known my capacity to support people through time, whether I'm in a body or out of a body, and I was happy to be of service to you. I mean, in that moment, you're kind of going, okay, it's like that timeless nature of being. Who are we really beyond time? And, how do we function in that way? And so this time element became, to your point, Richard, both past and future, they all kind of collided in that moment into the now moment. It's like, and how brilliant to have this experience, because it was like, oh my gosh, if she hadn't helped me then, I most definitely would not have had the capacity to support her now. And she would maybe not be able to go forward and support all that she was supporting. So it was just one of those moments where you kind of go, okay, I think I just learned through a personal experience about that timeless nature of being.
I've interviewed more than one person who's told me that they had met at some point in their life their future self. Mm-hmm. And it was a very real experience.
Yeah, well, that one all collided at the same time, for sure.
Yeah. Suzy, you said earlier about in 2012, when you had that event, these children said to you that we are the new science, we are the new medicine, we are the new education. What are they trying to show us by saying that?
I took it both ways, and I'm still watching that unfold. So Richard might have much more information about that than I do. What I noticed at that moment was it was almost like anybody who was like they were bringing in the information fields for that. They were bringing in the frequencies, the tones, the structure, the whatever of that information. But those that were already here, who were ready to receive that, were going to be open to receive. So let's say there's a scientist out there somewhere who's, maybe more vested in separation energy, or more, proving a point or that kind of thing. And then these kids start layering in, well, if that soul, that scientist, is open to more, is open to something different, to me, what it looked like is these kids were helping to layer in this evolution of that scientist, or this evolution of technology, or those kinds of things. Over time, and working with the kids, what I also saw is some of these kids were actually physically creating these technologies. Like I've also had children who say, we had a device made, a crystal device made at one point, because this young man came and said something about how human beings intend all kinds of different things for this population, but those intentions are not always pure or clear, because they're coming from our needs, our shadows, our divisiveness. And he created a technology that was put together and, physically manifest now. I have it with me, that is really designed to clear up those intentions, so that we learn more about how we're intending, or what we're intending, where we're intending from, and to clarify that intention, especially as it relates to them. So to me, it was both and. It was like this consciousness that was permeating the collective human experience, and different people picking that up, and that creating a mutation of sorts, and then them evolving through that, and the kids themselves actually showing up. Because a lot of these kids, you only need to do a little Google search around some of the science behind some of these kids, and you realize they're, they, at 12 or something, they picked up something, and here's the remedy for this, or here's the antidote for that. So, yeah, a little bit of both and is what I've experienced so far anyway.
Richard, what about your experience?
Well, I always say we are the technology, and but, it's what we've been talking about. That our future consciousness, which is here now, is preparing this higher technology of the body, of this new body, these new bodies, these new forms, bioforms, and it's in a way I'm always a little careful about even saying they, because that kind of removes it one bit further from I or me or us, because you don't want to get into they, them, and us, because it is us, and it's also the big us. It's the we, the divine we, that is creating this mythology, this new mythology that's opening this new door for us, and we get to all step into it. And obviously we have to, at some level, choose that. And there may be forms or souls that don't choose that, and that's their freedom to not choose it and to go through a future evolution in another time, and that's another story, because we've got this sort of forking of the paths now. We've got this old energy leaving, this old genetic information that's kind of decaying and declining, and I mean that like at all levels, at a collective level. And in a way, what you can see now is the final hurrah of that energy. It's like the fall of the Roman Empire. At the fall of the Roman Empire, towards the end, you get these very odd aberrations of or behaviors that come up that are quite extreme. And so we're seeing a lot more extreme behaviors and extremism, and that's that's what happens at the end of a kind of a life cycle of a gene pool, if you like. And then and we can put a lot of focus on that, right? It's not actually a great idea to put a huge focus on that, on what's declining, because then we get caught into anxiety and worry, and we think that's, we look to that for like stability, but that's never actually been very stable. And so what's new is truly stable, because it's being built on a bedrock that is pure, and I think that's why it's coming through children especially. And what we're going to have to learn is to create the new world through the eyes of children, and because we are going to be those children. So for me, like when we talk about the bending of time and the shifting of timelines and the memory that travels backwards and forwards equally, and that's quite a thing for humans, most humans, to get their head around. How can memory travel forwards? But I've lived with that for many years as a reality, and so for me, I'm you have to be quite malleable in your mind to encompass these new paradigms. You have to, if you're very scientifically laden with the need for proof and stuff, that's fine, but it's like, it's going to be tough for one to get your whole heart and being around these like very malleable kind of understandings of the new reality. Or it is actually not even new, it's a wider reality that's always been there all along. And there are other ways of reading reality other than the objective mind. There are ancient ways that have been around since the dawn of time, which used more the right brain or the body-centered awareness, the belly, like, that really feels and knows things. And I don't just mean gut, I mean, well, it is the gut actually, but I mean the higher consciousness of the gut, which is where this, I understand, is where this mutation is really kind of deeply occurring right now, which is why we're learning so much about the bacterial consciousness in our gut. And because it is an incredible technology, and it actually interpenetrates all of us and all life forms, like a mycelial layer. Like the bacterial DNA is the most common DNA on the planet, and we're 80-90% of it, is actually in our gut. So 90% of us is in our belly, which is a thing to think about. And yet it's not quite us. I mean, it's not the bit that's only in the brain. It's another part of us. It's a collective part of our being. So that it's through that being that we're going to be kind of awaken. It's through how bacteria refracts bioluminescence and wave patterns that the awareness can travel on. It travels on the bacterial DNA, because bacteria is in the air. It's everywhere. So that's actually the physical kind of aspects of how awareness can travel outside the body and then interconnect. That's at the physical layer. There are subtler layers as well, but it's quite something when you get your head around these different timelines and you're really tuning into, I can't even remember where I got to now, but it was revelation. That's the other way of really realizing things. You can know truth through revelation, through deep insight, wisdom that takes place inside the body through deep meditation or contemplation practice, or any deep interior practice. Eventually will begin to open up that knowing, that channel inside us that can get to truth actually much quicker than science, which, wonderful though it is, has to go through this long-winded process of elimination and proof. And and we live in a world where that's given huge amount of importance. And actually the other way for many of us is a much quicker way to understand these things, because we can talk about time and breaking down and fractal time and all that, but actually until you actually experience it deep in your being, you have no idea what I'm talking about or what Suzy's talking about, or Sandie, wouldn't you agree? We actually, for people that really have to understand it as a knowing,
Yes,
instead of like, this is something I've got to prove or disprove.
Yeah,
and that knowing's not cognitive either. It's a knowing in the body. It's like,
I'm also not sure whether we'll ever be able to prove it.
right. That's a great statement.
Yeah. I mean, not 100%. Just to say, a physicist recently said to me, when you apply all the insights we know from Newtonian physics and quantum physics, you will only ever be able to get a maximum of 80% certainty on anything. So there's a huge kind of sphere where what he was saying is there's always going to be a mystery somewhere that the objective mind cannot understand. And I think if scientists one day understand that, there's going to be a huge sigh of relief.
100%. We can live in the mystery. We can live in the experience of it.
We need the mystery. It's what keeps us going, So here's a question for both of you. Many of these children have spoken about their origins from other realms or times, such as Lemuria. Susie, you said that they're here because we called them in. But do you think that even beyond that, their presence is part of a much larger cosmic plan?
Yes. I don't know fully what that means yet, but what I do know is when when I very first started working with the kids and they, where are you from? Why are you here now? Those kinds of questions. A lot of them did say that, at least the children I was interacting with, said that they had not been here since they had not incarnated those souls since the time of Lemuria. And when I asked, I didn't know anything about Lemuria at the time. So I was asking about that, and they would say simply that the soul was more easily infused with that type of body because that was a body of light. We didn't have the density, we didn't have the imprints, we didn't have all of that. That separation energy, I guess, in the body. So they had said that. And then also, I think it goes without saying, or maybe not, but I mean, we're all multidimensional beings. We've all been in all kinds of bodies, in all kinds of realities. We've been in the future, we've been in the past, we've been in different dimensions, different realms. And so a lot of the kids also speak about some of the other worldly experiences that they've had, the other embodiments that they have that are allowing them to bring some of this information through this collective consciousness right now. So clearly there's more evolved, experiences out there than the human experience, right? We're growing bit by bit, but it's almost like they're bringing that in. And then there are others as well that have a remembrance of who they are beyond simply the human condition. And those people are also bringing in, the awareness that comes with those experiences.
Richard, what's your view on that?
Well, I love it because we're getting to cosmologies here, which I love, like big cosmologies, and when a lot of my esoteric training was in the sort of Rudolf Steiner schools and anthroposophy and all those things, and I've been inspired by some of those journeys and encoded in, when I sort of brought through the revelation of Gene Key 55, which is the one that's about freedom, and it's the one that's about this opening up and this mutation. And it was also inspired by Ra Uru Hu's understanding of that. I saw these 7 dimensional fields, or 7 epochs, which again came from earlier cosmologies. So like they were called, their names are like Polarian, that's the first one, that's the crystallization of the earth, of Gaia, and then the second, but and these are huge epochs, where the earth is forming and the coalescing of the elements, and where sort of, you have these lovely creation myths, or the Lord of the Rings, where they talk about like the gods, the deities battling it out, that's like those early forms, because they're literally the deities battling out the formation of the earth. So we project our creation myths onto these huge phases, and then the Hyperborean, which is when the elements start to combine, the 5 elements, they start to recombine and they start to create first life forms, and then you have the Lemurian, which is when the blue and the green arrive, vibrations arise, and photosynthesis begins, and suddenly everything turns blue and green, whereas before it was sort of brown and grey and fiery, and so in a way you could say that, and another insight I got from Ra was about crystals of consciousness, that we each are embedded with crystals of consciousness, and those crystals can incarnate in different timelines and places, and they encode memories. In a way, they're like the soul element, the soul essence, and they kind of live deep in the brain, in our kind of higher centers, and they contain the kind of cellular archetypal memory of all our existences, and they're gathering. They're almost like kind of celestial vagabonds that are moving, on their trajectories through the great, through this universe, and perhaps even some of them through other universes, in the multiverse. And so you got these beautiful cosmologies where, certain of those crystals were incarnate, let's say in the Lemurian time, and they've not been able to incarnate after. Then there was the Atlantean period. Again, these are huge epochs, hundreds of thousands of years. So far in our ancestral past that the memory of them has mostly faded, but maybe been kept alive by the consciousness field of the plant realm. In the plant realm allows us, when we take some of those psychoactive plants, or our shamans had taken them, they would unlock those stories of previous evolutions, because the plants remember everything, because they just go on. And the water as well. Water is the fluid that's in the plants, Anyway, so we would drink the sacred fluids and then have the memories come back and then tell the stories. And then the stories would get passed on down through our indigenous lineages, and they populate our kind of field of our mythologies. And so you see, but then if you come back to those sort of Lemurian times where the frequency was very refined, those crystals were not able to incarnate in a new epoch, because after the Atlantean period was what's called the fall, and this is the fall as the higher consciousness comes deeper into the form principle. So I'm not even adding kind of moral layers to this. It's not about good and evil. It's just this cosmology of consciousness arriving on Gaia. And so we then, the modern human, or the kind of proto-modern human, our recorded history, you could say, which is our current epoch. Its frequency couldn't take one of those higher crystals. It couldn't be here until now.
Okay.
Right? Only when the field is ready and ripe can those crystals come back and return, and they bring a different frequency, a more ancient frequency. But that's just one. So there are other crystals that potentially of even higher frequency that could arrive, or crystals from other systems, celestial systems, that can, also arrive. So it's a kind of really interesting time in our mythic cosmology, because we're sort of we're in the reversal of the fall period, and I got a whole map about this that you can look at and go, oh wow, that's so interesting that the fall was then, and then there's a climb back up, and a re-imprinting, and a big kind of shift in consciousness of the whole as it reintegrates, and a lot of it's past. So all the stories of those deep mythologies have to come back, so we remember them. And as I said, our indigenous people tend to have the deepest, longest memories, and they encode them in their stories. So those stories are very magical for us and very important, and because they, bringing them back and understanding them is a part of our rewiring. But yeah, so I think it's an incredibly rich, part of the story of understanding this time and these children, these star children, and and remember that they are us. They are our future consciousness, creating an architecture so that when we die in these forms, we can come back into that next higher form. So it then becomes part of a really interesting. You can then look at this period in our history as like one of deep kind of inspiration rather than tragedy. I think that's where I'm leading.
And that leads into another point. I mean, you talk about the crystals, the frequency wasn't right here. Now, both of you have spoken about the importance of creating vibrational spaces for the children so that this consciousness can land here. Same kind of thing, isn't it? So what would be the essential components of such a space? What do we need to do to make it easier for them to land here?
Well, I mean, from my vantage point, and Richard said it earlier, like we're turning this corner right now. We're just making this shift in a big way. And so something like authenticity, something like shadow work, something like, these kind of internal, to me, the outer environment is impacted by, yes, the physicality of that environment, and we can support that physical environment in all kinds of ways. But when I'm talking to parents of the kids or professionals who work with them, and I'm asking the kids, okay, day in, day out, how do we create the best environment for you? Well, first, that environment has to change internally, kind of what Richard was saying about we literally, mentally, emotionally, even right down into our biology, everything is starting to shift. And part of that is happening. As far as I can tell, it's happening because this is the time we're in. Part of it is happening because these kids or other I don't know what words to use, other more refined expressions are standing right in front of us. So they're kind of inviting us all the time to a deeper sense of who we are. But I think on a very practical level, I think this shadow work is so deeply important. And it's important because the more we start to integrate our wholeness, the more we start to be present to and invite ourselves to more of who we actually are, the more the vibration that's being given off from us is closer to who these kids are. So, I mean, they say very practical things like, let's just be authentic. Let's just be real. I mean, from the standpoint of oneness, if I can read your thoughts and I can read your emotions and I know what's going on in your biology, why not just share that? Why not have this level of authenticity? Why not step into our vulnerability, and be willing to be in that vulnerable state? Not because we're trying to victimize ourselves or anything like that, but because in that vulnerable state, we literally can step into love, compassion, and understanding for ourselves. That raises vibration, right? So I like to think about it, at least initially, as what is emanating, what's the vibrational space that's emanating from us? How do we refine that? We know that when we refine that within ourselves, that these kids reflect something completely different back than they have been reflecting. We also know that there's all kinds of, people out in the world who have tapped into these higher states of consciousness or these other realities, and they've brought them into some kind of physicalized experience here. Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Israel, like some of the information that he's sharing right now, about what can go into a space to kind of create that vibrational difference was pretty amazing for me to hear, what Richard's doing with the gene keys and inviting us to all these different awarenesses and aspects of ourselves. I mean, we are vibrational beings. So I think we create the environment for these new children by becoming it, like literally by owning it and becoming it. So, yeah. Richard?
Yeah, beautiful. And I have a program running at the moment called the Star Pearl, where it's a set of tools that's designed to create, I can even call it the harmonics, embodying the harmonics of the future human. That's exactly what you're saying. It's about just anyone, who wants to explore that, it goes through a process of really looking very deeply at all the different areas of their life and then finding weak points, where there's discomfort or unfulfilled places or uncomfortable places where the frequency is a little bit off, and then we go into those points and we tune them. We actually tune them, we tune them by looking at them and being honest with ourselves, but we also do physical things. We change our decision processes. We change our views. We maybe change our life as well in real practical ways, adjusting it so that it can create a better resonant temple, for our dream life. And so it's very practical in that sense. And there's, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 people currently come in and working at that level. And it's an experiment in collective consciousness field, because we have an app that kind of will track statistics around people's lives around that, because there's a way in which that works. So it's that's one of the things we need to create, is these kind of resonant collective groupings of humans who are healthy and balanced inside themselves, or doing that shadow work, as you said, deeply involved in it, because then you're creating an atmosphere into which a kind of higher consciousness incarnating crystal will naturally wish to come. So it will want to come into a community like that. So it will find, a mother somewhere in a community like that, and then land. And I think those communities can go on building, whether it's, whatever systems people are using. There's a lot of amazing work going out in the world in many communities using different tools. And I think those interconnected communities, even though they may not be fully connected externally, they are they're all doing the same job of creating this field, so that the future us can come into a cleaner energy field. And I think also there's, on a physical level, I think, creating spaces in the land where we are living in harmony with regenerative practices. Those are also very, very important, and living simply again, connected to the earth and the seasons and the cycles wherever we are in the world. So I think we're going to see more of that appearing as well. And the building of these future technologies that are kind of the technologies of understanding light and sound, and working with sound at very fine levels for healing. This is all beginning to appear now in the world. So I think we're going to go on exploring those things and creating that new medicine. I call it the Aquarian medicine, and these new modalities for kind of landing that higher consciousness, and new understanding of nutrition, how to feed the biome so that it's really, really healthy. And again, that's stuff we're learning. What foods the body really needs, and how they should be prepared, with awareness and love and all that stuff. So I think that there's an actual physical need, and even the architecture the future architecture that we might design and live in, that's based on harmonics and geometry, sacred geometry, but simplicity as well. And the materials are, they don't have to be complex. They don't have to last for thousands of years. They could be timber and stone and, and glass and stained glass, and they and earth, and so we're really exploring, I think, a new paradigm that is kind of beginning to appear all over the place. And I find it very inspiring and very exciting, that we're sort of preparing Eden for ourselves, but it's difficult to see unless you're looking for it.
You said in an earlier conversation that you've been there's a possible potential collaboration with Zach Bush. What would the two of you be researching or exploring?
What mischief might we get up to? I had a chat with him the other day. Well, one thing we're talking about is creating a series of gene keys, amino acids that would enable people who are working with these frequencies to actually have a nutrition that is directly correlated to a gene key. So in other words, to one of these archetypes that you're working on. It could be a shadow that you're transforming. So you can actually, you'd be actually have to increase your capacity to embody it. So you'd so through those they're more than supplements. Actually, they're a lot more than supplements. They're very highly kind of designed, molecular, profiled kind of biofood that's highly specific to working with the gene keys or working with a deep contemplative practice. So that's one thing we're coming up with.
Wow.
But other things, I think the actual exploring of this mutation and maybe mapping it and understanding where in the genome it's likely to appear. We haven't done that yet, but we've talked about it, and then also tracking it. I mean, Zach was talking about mutations in DNA, triple mutations. Like, my understanding of the next human race species is this is in my system. I call it the Trivian human, which is the triple way, the Trinity, because the Trinity is how the divine self-organizes into units of three. So triple strand DNA. The number 3 is the transcendent number, because you have yin and yang, and then you have the child, the transcendent. So divine mathematics has always been like 1 + 1 = 3. And so it's a constant, so that future human is going to kind of operate in lots of trinary ways, and it's going to understand itself through those trinities and operate in lots of different layers of trinities, and that doesn't mean only threes. It just means maybe 3 groups that are networked in different ways. And those are things I've been exploring the gene keys for a while in our community, and I have a sort of map of what the future human looks like at a sort of energetic level, and it's built out of 3s. The awareness system's built out of 3, with a 4th kind of hive mind in the middle that kind of integrates the 3 aspects of its awareness. I shouldn't call it an it, because it's us. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot more mischief we could get up to.
Sounds really exciting. Yeah,
I think we're going to hook up this summer.
It's so exciting, Richard, because you think about this whole, we were just talking about that connection with that gut biome and that interconnectedness. And this is where I see that so many of these kids, this is where they're kind of getting stuck, that frequency that they're trying to bring in, not a match with the frequency of that, you might say, that denser gut biome and the collective, interface, that human collective interface. And to have something that would actually, deeply support that. Like Sandie was saying earlier, one of the kids very early on would literally demonstrate to me how he could mutate the food. He could transform the food, or the molecular structure of the food to actually be what his body needed, instead of the other way around. And I took that to mean that, that information was being layered into that gut biome, right? So that, because when it gets there, that information is now spreading, into the collective. It's like the soil's been tilled. It's all going out into the collective, which to me is just flipping fascinating and so exciting. And it's exciting that that's where we are, as far as part of our conversation, and like truly embodying that new human, like right down into our biology. And this is where Zach, to me, like just listening to him, has, so many of these elements. I get so excited listening to him for this very reason, because, the kids have talked about this, a lot of times they'll be integrated, but they'll be integrated into the heart, or they'll be integrated maybe sometimes, a little bit lower than that now. But that gut piece, it's so challenging for that crystallized information that you were talking about to be fully embodied right down into the gut. And it's probably also the reason why there's so much conversation now about gut health and about the microbiome and all these things. That has to be up leveled, to your question, Sandie, about, how do we create these environments, like creating that environment within our own bodies, like that embodiment, I think is huge. And what you said, Richard, about the Trinity, in the New World Portal, when we're working energetically and things like that with just that integration, it's all about integration, mentally, emotionally, physically, all of it. That triad of divine mother, divine father, divine child, over and over and over again comes back in, because, and I love what you said about it's beyond that. It's the mother and the child. You could represent in some ways the polarity. The child coming out of that is always an evolutionary jump from what the parentage was, right? And as we start to more fully embody that divine mother, divine father, divine child within us, those creations of new children, those creations of new ideas, that, to me, that's where things that's the world I want to come back into. That's the life that I, want to live, this next rung of the ladder or next rung of the spiral, right? So, yeah, brilliant. That's so exciting.
If anyone thinks that we aren't evolving, they've only got to look at what's happening in society today and forget, all the things that are crumbling. On the other side, we've got this explosion now. I mean, look at how the telepathy tapes has just, everybody's talking about it. And you've waited a long time for this, Suzy, I know. How is all of this information that is now priming people to raise their consciousness, how are the children reacting to that? What do they say about this?
It's an interesting conversation, because I don't think it's as simple as just getting the information out there and sharing this information. That it's almost like, to me, it feels, what they keep showing me is like the collective human consciousness has been tilled up. It's like we're planting seeds, right? And they're the consciousness opening up in this way, on the one hand, gives the opportunity for them to land and to blossom and to grow and those kinds of things. But on the other side of it is when you till up a collective consciousness, and that collective consciousness is still maybe in separation, or still in, maybe, how do I want to say it? Is that consciousness has not yet been able to know themselves more deeply. What ends up happening is there's a lot of projection onto these kids as the them that, they, that Richard was talking about earlier. And so some of the kids that I've been working with have been saying, okay, on the one hand, it's wonderful because the energy has all been tilled up. But on the other hand, it's extremely challenging right now because all eyes are on us. And because that energy is kind of just breaking open in kind of a more chaotic kind of way in some ways, not because of the people putting it out or anything like that, but simply because it's being received by all kinds of different individuals who have all kinds of different awarenesses about these kids. I mean, I know firsthand that in 99, when I first learned this about the kids, I did the exact same thing. It's like that, it's part of our growth and our evolution to kind of go, oh my gosh, there's this, and these kids are not what we perceive them to be. And we almost put them on a pedestal, or, they're going to do it. They're going to help us. They're going to save us. We're missing the point completely if we go down that road. It's more like an invitation to remember who we are in truth, and to remember that we are human and vulnerable and have a shadow, and also divine, and have these multidimensional gifts in these cities, and they both coexist. It's a both and. instead of an either or. And they both dance off of each other. But if we just make it about them being superior, it puts us in a place of inferiority. And the moment that we're there, we don't have as much of an impetus or even a desire to really know ourselves as the gifts that they're bringing, right? And the more I'm talking to the kids about this, they just keep saying, like, let's not miss the opportunity that's being presented here. It's not about just putting us on a pedestal. It's really about receiving these gifts, letting that energy permeate physical, mental, emotional, and become the new human. Yeah.
We've got about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to focus on practical steps because Suzy, you've talked about how these kids repeatedly emphasize that, that their parents and the professionals that support them, must also evolve to fully, be able to support them. And Richard, your work is all about helping us evolve and, and preparation for this. What practical steps can you suggest that people take to start putting themselves into a place where they can support these children, whether they're parents or not? So if both of you could, give us a few tips.
Just before, I'll let Richard answer this first, but before he does, I just want to say, do the gene keys because I just want to, it is a huge, honestly, being in the star pearl myself right now and like that inner exploration, that opportunity to take a look at some of those shadow aspects. And I say to the people in my community all the time, it's like, we're not looking at these shadow aspects to make ourselves wrong or bad. We're not looking at them so that we can just regurgitate a shame, blame, kind of programming, but to literally look at those aspects of ourselves with love, compassion, and understanding. That this is the imprint that we've held, that this is what we're trying to evolve from. I think that's, I don't plug things very often, Richard, but I will here because I just feel like to have that deep self-inquiry in and of itself it's huge. It's huge for these kids. So.
Well, right there, I think that's an enormous part of, what we should be looking at doing.
Yeah. However we do that, but I will say the Gene Keys does, it has a depth to it. It has an invitation to it that doesn't feel like a push or a shove or and what I know by talking to the kids is like, they're creating invitations to us all the time.
Yeah.
Whether we actually take that invitation or not is completely up to us. And as far as I can tell, they're not really worried one way or the other, whether we take the invitation or not. They're just presenting the invitation and, an invitation to authenticity, to honor those places within ourselves. So, sorry.
I would like to just take a moment and say something myself about the Gene Keys, because I think anyone who knows me knows that I've been a big fan of it for many, many years. For me, what the Gene Keys epitomizes is what I think we're all here for, which is know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you know yourself and really embody that and, behave from that, wow, Anyway, Richard, give us your suggestions for what people can do.
Well, thank you both also for representing my work in that way. It's very sweet, and I kind of agree with you actually. But well, there are many other ways, but I think you really said it well, Suzy. Like, it's whatever you use, it's about finding that shadow and owning it, and then absolutely loving it. And that is an incredible thing. Once you've begun to do that, your life just is going to transform itself, because you're no longer running from yourself. You're no longer running from the darker parts of yourself that you didn't want to admit that were there. You weren't able to integrate them, or you were kind of shoving them away, feeling ashamed or guilty, or whatever. So yeah, really creating a space in your inner life so that you can absolutely learn to love yourself, and learn to love those difficult moments. Love yourself, parent yourself in those difficult moments. I think that's absolutely key, and also understanding that the shadow or trauma is an invitation to kind of to go towards the light. So if you're not going towards the shadow, you're not going towards the light. You're just
100%.
bypassing. So you've got to go the place you fear the most.
100%.
But that's where the light is hidden. And so once you kind of taken the first few steps, and you realize, oh, this isn't actually that bad, because I have love on my side, and love is can conquer all. You kind of realize, oh, I can do this. I've got this. I can heal myself, take care of myself, support myself. I can get beyond my loneliness. I can break that pattern of anxiety. I actually have it within me to kind of find my own inner fuel, or find the support I need to get where I want to be, so that I feel whole again. That's an amazing self-empowered journey that anyone can make. And there are so many great people around now who can help us. I mean, there's a lot of false ones as well, but that's part of the game of listening to your intuition and learning about discernment, the art of discernment. Like, it's okay if you get hoodwinked by someone, and just forgive yourself and go, oh, well, I learned from that. I will try again, and hopefully get different advice this time, or whatever it is. But I think there's a lot out there, and I think really trusting your intuition on your journey is key. We're going to, in my business, in my world of the Gene Keys this year, we're putting a lot of development into technology, and we're going to be creating apps and things that make the Gene Keys much more available, more easily, for a wider group of people who don't have to be such deep divers, because for some people it's too much, and they just want little bites at the beginning, and then they maybe, they'll have another little bite, and that's maybe that's as much as they can handle this week or this month or whatever. So we're going to make it more accessible for more people in that way, which I hope will help.
I think that piece is amazing, Richard, because quite honestly, it feels like, that deep dive that we do, that self-inquiry, that also evolves as well. So, for a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, it was, always the presence process by Michael Brown. That was my introduction into that inner child work, and that way of really recognizing at some point that whatever might show up, it might show up and it might not feel very comfortable, but there was a means of addressing that. There was a way of moving into love, compassion, and understanding for that part of self. And then it feels like that evolves too. And it's like the inquiry gets deeper. What I will say is in 30 years, I've never seen the family structure or the experience of parents and children. I've never seen it significantly improve without that inner work, without that self-inquiry. It's like, to me, that is the key as far as I can tell. And the kids keep bringing this back over and over again. it's almost like without healing or integrating, better said, that those aspects of ourselves, it's like there's no place for this, no place for this emerging new human, right? To actually express itself. No place for us to see these kids as who they really are, right? We have to see ourselves as who we really are to be able to see through those eyes. So that evolutionary deepening of inquiry is, I think it's just, and sometimes people say to me, so when will this be done? Like when is this over? I'm like, it's not over until it's over. It's like there's not a over. It's an evolution, right?
But we're beginning a whole new epoch.
Yes.
It's a completely different story.
Yeah, exactly.
Richard, I love what you've shared about what Gene Keys is doing, because there needs to be, we need to be addressing those that haven't taken a deep dive, and we have to do that in increments. So that's wonderful news. Suzy, I know that back in 2008, you published Awesomism, a new way to understand the diagnosis of autism. Now, 17 years later, you're producing another book. What is going to be in this new book that wasn't in the last one?
Yeah, there was an awful lot of learning from 2008 when Awesomism got published to now. And it just felt like humanity wasn't quite, it's like, it's not just about getting information out. It's also about the ripeness of people being able to receive that information. And so it's going to go into everything that's been learned since then, and also hopefully kind of clarify some of just some of what's going on right now. It's like the more we can bring coherence to that, the more we can just make it easily accessible. It's, in some ways, some of these things are big concepts, but can we bring it right down to the basics, and we can just share information along those lines? It will also have a lot of practical application, because I think that's one of the things I've been learning over the last 17 years is how to form a language around this and how to apply it in a very practical way, so that all the information that's come through kind of goes into that practical application, so people can see, real change in their lives, which would, be amazing. I'd love that.
So both of you, if you could say anything that you think people most need to hear at this moment in time, keep it short, what would it be, Richard?
Well, I think it's what we said earlier, that, this is actually, you look at the outside world and you see one thing, but actually this is an incredibly illuminating time to be alive. And, it's not hope. It's actually, it's fact. The new human is coming. It's already here. We've talked about it today. The forerunners are here. The seed is here. It's here inside each and every one of us. We are those children. If we can see ourselves in the eyes of those children, and that, we are big, then we stop that kind of them and us. We're like, oh, that's us. That's me. I'm one of those. I'm the seed. I have that seed inside me, and then we're going to see it spread in a way that is mysterious and subtle and probably pretty fast as well in evolutionary terms. And so I would say, let's not get overly distracted by that which is declining clearly in the outer world, or that which is throwing up all kinds of, disturbance and chaos. Let's focus inwards and focus our gaze on the thing that's growing, on the thing that's beautiful, on the thing that's fresh, that's pure, that's eternal, both inside us, and see it in the world. See where it's burgeoning, and your intuition will lead you to it in so many different ways. So follow that intuition and trust in it. That's what I'd say. because it's an incredible time to be alive. There's massive good news coming.
Thank you. Suzy?
Yeah, I would say that we're all energy. We're vibration. We're in a state of constant and consistent becoming, and that becoming is inside of us. It's like we're not becoming something that we're reaching for. We're becoming something that we've always been. It's unfolding. And, I'm with you, Richard, on this inside, be internal, know thyself. It's like know thyself. And then watch the rest of reality kind of shift around you. Because again, if we're broadcasting something different, if we're broadcasting that knowing of self, if we're broadcasting our integrated self, more of our wholeness, how can we not get that reflection from the outer world? So, yeah, I'm very optimistic myself. So it's a good time to be here.
Richard Rudd, Suzy Miller, thank you.
Thank
Before
you.
we go, I've got one question for our audience. If the next evolution of humanity is one of collective telepathic intelligence, a world without deception, and an expanded reality beyond our current 5 senses, would you be ready to live in it? Think on that. For more information about Richard Rudd and the Gene Keys programs, visit genekeys.com. And for more information about Suzy Miller's integration work, programs, books and services, visit suzymiller.com. That's it for this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If today's conversation sparked your curiosity, you'll love our other shows. The Synergy Sessions, where leading-edge thinkers collide in bold, unscripted dialogues that ignite new possibilities. Between Realms and Reason, where we journey into the mysterious consciousness, energy, and the hidden layers of reality, where science converges with spirit in ways you've never imagined. And the No BS Spiritual Book Club, where leading-edge new thought speakers, teachers, authors, and luminaries who've walked this path before you share the 10 books that had the biggest impact on their life journey. All 3 shows are available on YouTube, Spotify, Substack, and all major podcast platforms. For more information, visit sedgbeer.com. That's SEDGBEER.com.